Police officer finds abandoned little girl in ant colony. What he discovers leaves everyone in tears. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the journey. James Rowley drove his pickup truck slowly down the dirt road, dust billowing behind him like a tan cloud in the Georgia heat. At 68, he'd been retired from his sheriff's position for almost a year, but he still made these patrol drives through the forgotten corners of Pine Hollow County. Old habits die hard, and these rural routes had become something of a meditation for him. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the road. James rolled down his window, letting the warm air carry the scent of wildflowers and earth into the cab. His wedding band caught the sunlight as he tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. 15 years a widower, but some things you just don't let go of. James slowed as he approached a clearing he'd passed 100 times before. Something was different today. A flutter of movement caught his eye, birds circling overhead more than usual. He pulled over, his instincts from 40 years in. Law enforcement still sharp as ever. Probably just a deer, he muttered to himself, reaching for his hat. But something felt wrong. The tall grass crunched beneath his boots as he made his way into the clearing. The birds were focused on something near a large anthill at the edge of the woods. James quickened his pace, his heart suddenly picking up rhythm. What he saw next would change everything. A small form lay crumpled near the anthill, partially covered in dirt and crawling with ants. A child, a little girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old. Her clothes were tattered, her frame painfully thin. For one terrible moment, James thought he was too late. Then he saw her chest rise and fall with shallow breath. "Dear God," he whispered, rushing forward. He gently brushed away the ants, his hands trembling. "Hold on, little one. Hold on." The child's eyes fluttered but didn't open. Her skin was hot with fever, her arms covered in small red welts from the ants. James quickly removed his light jacket, carefully wrapping it around her tiny frame. "You're going to be all right," he said, his voice cracking as he lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, like picking up a bundle of twigs. "I've got you now." James ran back to his truck, his old knees protesting but adrenaline pushing him forward. He placed her gently in the passenger seat, securing her as best he could. "County Hospital, 20 minutes away," he said, starting the engine with shaking hands. He grabbed his old police radio, still kept charged out of habit, and called in an emergency. As he sped down the dusty road, James kept glancing at the child beside him. Who was she? How had she ended up alone in that clearing? Where were her parents? The hospital staff was waiting when he screeched into the OR emergency entrance. Dr. Elaine Carter, who'd known James for decades, met him at the door. "She's still breathing," James said as nurses gently transferred the child to a gurney. "Found her by the old Mitchell property, covered in ants." Dr. Carter's expression darkened as she examined the girl. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration," she said quietly. "James, this child has been neglected for weeks, maybe months." The girl was rushed inside, leaving James standing in the entrance, his empty jacket in his hands. 3 hours later, James sat outside the pediatric ICU, his hat in his hands. "Doctor." Carter approached, her face grim but determined. "She's stable," she said. "But James..." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "We've checked every database. No missing children reports match her description. No records at all." James looked up, his eyes questioning. "It's like this child doesn't exist," Dr. Carter said. "What do you mean she doesn't exist?" James leaned forward in the uncomfortable hospital chair, his weathered hands tightly gripping his hat. "Every child has records, birth certificates, vaccination records, something." Dr. Carter sat beside him, her voice low. "We've checked everything, James. No matching missing child reports in Georgia or neighboring states. No birth records matching her description or estimated age. We've even checked with schools in a 100-mile radius." She shook her head. "Nothing." James gazed through the window of the pediatric ICU, where the little girl lay connected to IVs and monitors. Her small chest rose and fell steadily now, her face peaceful in sleep. "Can I see her?" he asked. Inside the room, a nurse named Eleanor was adjusting the girl's blanket. She smiled softly at James as he approached the bed. The child looked even smaller, surrounded by medical equipment, her arms thin as twigs, her cheeks hollow. But already, cleaned up and hydrated, there was a hint of color returning to her face. "We've been calling her Jane Doe in the records," Eleanor said, checking the IV. "But that seems so impersonal." James studied the little girl's face, delicate features, long lashes, light brown hair that curled slightly around her ears. Something about her reminded him of wildflowers bending in the breeze. "Lily," he said suddenly. "She looks like a lily to me." Eleanor smiled. "Lily it is then, at least until we know her real name." James pulled up a chair beside the bed. "How is she doing?" "She's responding well to treatment," Eleanor explained. "The dehydration was severe, but children are remarkably resilient. The malnutrition is more concerning. It's been going on for some time." She hesitated. "There are other things the doctors are looking into. Some unusual blood markers." "What kind of unusual?" "Dr. Carter can explain better. She's ordered more tests." James nodded, his eyes never leaving the child's face. "I'll need to file a report. Start investigating. Someone must know who she is." Eleanor touched his shoulder gently. "You're retired, Sheriff. This isn't your responsibility." "I found her," James said simply. "That makes it my responsibility." After Eleanor left, James remained by the bedside. Outside the window, dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. He thought about heading home but couldn't bring himself to leave. Instead, he found himself talking softly to the sleeping child. "Don't you worry, Lily. We're going to figure this out." To his surprise, the girl's eyelids fluttered. For a brief moment, her eyes opened, deep brown with flecks of amber, looking directly at him before closing again. James called for the nurse, but by the time Eleanor returned, Lily was sleeping peacefully again. "Did she say anything?" Eleanor asked. "No, but she looked right at me. She's in there, fighting." Later that night, James finally stepped out to call his former deputy, now Sheriff Tom Brannigan. "I need access to the station resources, Tom. This isn't right. A child doesn't just appear out of nowhere. You know I respect you, James, but you're retired. Let my deputies handle the investigation." "Tom, I found her. I need to see this." "Through." There was a pause on the line. "Fine, come by tomorrow. I'll give you temporary consultant status. But James, don't get too attached. If we find family—" "I know how it works," James interrupted. "I'll see you tomorrow." Returning to Lily's room, James settled into the chair for the night. He wouldn't leave her alone. Not yet. As he drifted off to sleep, his hand resting near hers on the bed, he was startled awake by a small movement. Lily's tiny fingers had wrapped around his thumb, holding on with surprising strength. And in that moment, James Rowley knew he wouldn't rest. Until he discovered the truth about this mysterious child who had appeared like a ghost in his path. The Pine Hollow County Sheriff's Station hadn't changed much in the year since James had retired. The same faded American flag hung beside the door, the same coffee pot gurgled in the corner, and the same creaky floorboard announced his arrival as he stepped inside. "Feels like you never left," Sheriff Brannigan said, extending his hand. Though only in his 40s, Tom's face carried the weathered look of a man who'd seen too much in a small rural county that was slowly dying. "Wish it were under better circumstances," James replied, shaking his hand firmly. Tom led him to a small desk in the corner, not his old office, but a workstation with a computer and phone. "You can use this. I've given you temporary clearance for the databases." He lowered his voice. "Any change with the girl?" "Her name's Lily," James said automatically. "And yes, she's improving. Started responding to stimuli overnight. Doctor says she might fully wake up today." Tom nodded. "Good. That might help us identify her." He hesitated. James, I've got deputies canvassing, but it's strange. Nobody's reported a missing child matching her description. Not just here. Nowhere within 100 miles. That's why I'm here, James said, settling into the chair. Someone knows something. For the next few hours, James immersed himself in the search. He pulled up maps of the area where he'd found Lily, marking abandoned properties, remote cabins, and homes known to house off-the-grid families. Pine Hollow County had seen better days. The lumber mill closure 10 years ago had devastated the economy, leaving empty storefronts and foreclosed homes in its wake. Many folks had simply disappeared, moving away in search of work or retreating deeper into the woods to escape mounting bills. By noon, James had identified 17 locations worth checking within a 5-mile radius of where he'd found Lily. I'm heading out, he told Tom, grabbing his hat. Gonna check these properties. Take Deputy, Collins with you, Tom insisted. Some of those places aren't safe. James wanted to argue, but knew Tom was right. Many abandoned buildings had become havens for wildlife or worse. Young Deputy Collins drove while James navigated. The first 3 properties yielded nothing. An empty trailer with a collapsed roof, a cabin reclaimed by forest, and a house stripped bare by metal thieves. At the 4th location, a small convenience store still in operation on the edge of what locals called the Forgotten Woods, they finally found something. Mitchell's Grocery was barely holding on, its faded sign hanging askew above a dusty parking lot. Inside, Harold Mitchell, nearly as old as the store itself, squinted at the photo James showed him on his phone. Might have seen her, he said, adjusting his glasses. Little thing, comes in with a woman sometimes. Or used to. He frowned. Haven't seen them in a while, month, maybe 2. James felt his pulse quicken. What woman, her mother? Harold shrugged. Never said. Strange lady, kept to herself. Bought odd things. Lots of canned goods, matches, first aid supplies. Paid cash, always. Where did they live? Deputy Collins asked. Never said. That either. But they'd come from that direction. Harold pointed toward a dense stretch of woods. There's an old logging road about a mile up. Not on any maps anymore. Company abandoned it years ago. James thanked him, and they headed in the direction Harold had indicated. Sure enough, they found the overgrown road, barely visible among the encroaching vegetation. We should get the truck, Collins suggested. No time, James said, already walking. We'll lose daylight. The path grew narrower as they pushed deeper into the woods. James's heart pounded, not from exertion but anticipation. After 20 minutes, he stopped suddenly, bending down to examine something half buried in mud. A small, worn shoe. Child-sized. We're on the right track, he said quietly, slipping it into his pocket. As they rounded a bend in the path, James felt a chill despite the warm day. There, nestled among the trees, stood a small cabin. Weathered gray boards, a slanting roof patched with tarp. A small porch with a rocking chair sitting motionless in the breeze. Careful, Collins whispered, hand moving to his holster. Could be occupied. But James knew already. The stillness around the cabin spoke volumes. Nobody's home, he said. Not anymore. The cabin door creaked on rusty hinges as James pushed it open, revealing a world frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight streaming through dirty windows. Deputy Collins entered behind him, both men instinctively placing their hands over their noses against the musty air. Someone definitely lived here, Collins said softly, sweeping his flashlight across the small space. James moved slowly through the main room, taking in every detail. The cabin was sparse but showed clear signs of habitation. A small wood stove with ashes still in the grate, 2 cups on a rough-hewn table, a shelf with canned goods and jars of dried herbs labeled in shaky handwriting. Most telling were the makeshift accommodations, a larger mattress on a low frame in one corner, and nearby, a small pallet on the floor made from blankets and what looked like stuffed animals, a child's bed. James approached it carefully. A tattered teddy bear missing one eye sat atop the blankets. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. Something about it struck him as familiar, though he couldn't place why. "Sheriff," Collins called from a small, adjacent room. "You need to see this." James found the deputy standing before a wall covered in drawings, crayon and pencil artwork tacked up with care, children's drawings, stick figures, houses with smoke curling from chimneys, bright yellow suns with rays shooting outward. But something about them felt off. Dark clouds loomed in many pictures. In others, the stick figures stood far apart. "Lily's work?" Collins asked. "I'd bet on it," James replied, studying the images. One drawing caught his eye. 3 figures holding hands, a tall figure labeled Mama, a medium figure called Cat, and a small one with Me written beside it in wobbly letters. 2 women and a child, James murmured. Harold mentioned a woman, singular. Maybe one was away when they visited the store, Collins suggested. James continued examining the cabin. In the kitchenette area, he found a row of medicine. Bottles, some prescription containers with labels removed, others containing what looked like homemade remedies. A notebook lay beside them, its pages filled with increasingly disjointed writing. James flipped through it carefully. Early entries were coherent, lists of supplies, reminders about gathering herbs, notes about weather patterns. But as he progressed, the writing became erratic, sometimes spiraling around the page rather than following lines. The final entry sent a chill through him. "They're watching through the walls. Must keep her safe. Sarah would want me to keep her safe." "Sarah," James said aloud, the name stirring something in his memory. A floorboard creaked beneath his foot as he moved toward a small chest of drawers. Inside, he found children's clothing, all well worn but clean, and a small photo frame face down at the bottom of the drawer. James turned it over, his breath catching. The photo showed a young woman with a gentle smile, her arms around a small, laughing toddler. The woman's face was partially obscured by a glare on the glass, but something about her eyes seemed hauntingly familiar. James carefully pocketed the photo, an uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. "We should check outside," Collins suggested. "There might be more clues." As they stepped onto the porch, a twig snapped somewhere in the woods. Both men froze, listening. "Probably a deer," Collins whispered. But James wasn't convinced. He moved toward the sound, eyes scanning the, dense trees. The rustling grew louder, then stopped abruptly. "Hello?" he called. "We're with the sheriff's department. Is anyone there?" Silence fell, heavy and expectant. Then a figure emerged from behind a large oak, a woman with wild, tangled hair and clothes that hung loosely on her thin frame. Her eyes were wide and alert, darting between the 2 men with a mixture of fear and defiance. "What are you doing at my house?" she demanded, her voice hoarse but strong. "And what have you done with my little girl?" James stepped forward slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Ma'am, I'm James Rowley, former sheriff. Can I ask your name?" The woman's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Catherine," she finally said. "Catherine Ellis. Now where is my daughter? What have you done with her?" "Your daughter?" James kept his voice gentle, taking another careful step toward Catherine. Her clothes were stained and worn, her fingers constantly moving, twisting an invisible string. "Can you tell me her name?" Catherine's eyes darted from James to Deputy Collins, then to the cabin behind them. "Lilyflower," she said, her voice softening. "My sweet Lilyflower. She's inside, isn't she? Taking her nap?" She started forward, but James blocked her path. "Mrs. Ellis," he said carefully. "I found a little girl yesterday, near the Mitchell property. She was alone and needed medical help." Catherine's expression shifted rapidly, confusion, then anger, then fear cycling across her face. "No, no. That's wrong. She's inside. She's taking her nap." Her voice rose. "You're one of them, aren't they? The ones who listen through the walls." Collins moved his hand toward his holster, but James signaled him to stand down. He recognized the signs, the disconnection from reality, the paranoia. Catherine Ellis was ill, not dangerous. "Catherine," James tried again. "The little girl I found is at County Hospital. She's safe, but she's been alone for some time. She needs help. Hospital. Catherine's eyes widened with genuine terror. No, they'll hurt her there. They'll put things in her head, just like they tried with me, just like they did with Sarah. James's heart skipped at the name. Sarah? Who's Sarah, Catherine? For a moment, clarity seemed to break through the cloud in Catherine's eyes. Sarah was my friend. She understood about the voices. Her fingers twisted faster. She brought medicines when the voices were loud. She knew how to make them quieter. And Lily Flower, James pressed gently. Is she your daughter? Catherine's face crumpled into an expression of such profound confusion that James felt a wave of compassion. She's mine to protect, Catherine whispered. Sarah said so, before she went away. James approached carefully, noticing how Catherine's clothes hung from her frame, how her cheekbones protruded sharply. Catherine, when did you last eat? She looked puzzled by the question. We had soup. Lily Flower didn't want hers. How about you come with us? We can take you to see Lily Flower. A spark lit in Catherine's eyes. She's really at the hospital, not in her bed? Yes, James confirmed. And I think she'd be happy to see a familiar face. It took nearly 20 minutes of gentle coaxing, but eventually Catherine agreed to accompany them back to town. In the patrol car, she sat rigidly, her eyes constantly moving, occasionally mumbling to herself about the watchers and the medicine cabinet. At the hospital, Dr. Carter met them at the entrance, already briefed by Collins's radio call. Mrs. Ellis, she said gently, I'm Dr. Carter. Before you see Lily, I'd like to check you over as well. I need my medicines, Catherine said anxiously, the ones that make the voices softer. We'll help you with that, Dr. Carter assured her. While Catherine was being examined, James paced the hallway outside Lily's room. Eleanor, the nurse, emerged, her face brightening when she saw him. She's awake, she said excitedly. Not talking yet, but she's responsive, follows movement with her eyes. James felt a surge of relief. That's wonderful news, and we may have found someone who knows her, a woman named Catherine. Ellis claims Lily is her daughter, but... He hesitated. But you're not sure, Eleanor finished for him, understanding in her eyes. She's clearly suffering from some form of mental illness. Keeps mentioning someone named Sarah, too. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Well, maybe seeing Lily will help us understand more. An hour later, after Catherine had been evaluated, medicated, and deemed stable enough for a brief visit, James accompanied her to Lily's room. The change in Catherine was remarkable. The emergency psychiatric consultation had helped calm her, though her eyes still darted nervously around the hospital corridors. At Lily's bedside, Catherine's entire demeanor transformed. Lily Flower, she whispered, reaching for the child's hand. I told them you weren't in your bed. Lily's eyes opened at the sound of Catherine's voice. For a breathless moment, James watched, waiting for a joyful reunion. But while recognition flickered in the child's eyes, there was something else too. Hesitation, perhaps even fear. Sweet girl, Catherine crooned, stroking Lily's hair. Aunt Cat is here now. Aunt Cat, not Mama. James caught the distinction immediately. Catherine, he said softly. You said Lily is your daughter, but you just called yourself Aunt Cat. Catherine looked up, confusion crossing her face again. Did I? She frowned. Sometimes I forget. Sarah said it was important to remember. Who is Sarah? James pressed gently. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Sarah is gone. She went to sleep and didn't wake up, but she made me promise to keep Lily Flower safe. James felt a chill run through him as the pieces began to align. Not into a complete picture yet, but enough to sense the outline of a tragedy. Catherine, he asked, was Sarah Lily's mother? Catherine's response to James's question never came. Her eyes had grown distant again, her attention shifting to the window where she stared, transfixed by something only she could see. Dr. Carter, observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "I think that's enough for today," she said, gently, guiding Catherine to her feet. "Mrs. Ellis needs rest and more comprehensive evaluation." James wanted to protest but knew the doctor was right. Catherine had retreated into her own world again, mumbling about shadows and voices. As Dr. Carter led her away, James turned his attention back to, Lily, who was watching the entire scene with solemn, intelligent eyes. "Hey there," James said softly, taking the chair beside her bed. "You're looking stronger today." Lily regarded him silently, her small fingers plucking at the edge of her blanket. Though still thin, her face had regained some color, making the amber flecks in her brown eyes more prominent. James was struck again by a sense of familiarity he couldn't quite place. Eleanor entered with a tray of children's foods, applesauce, toast cut into triangles, a small carton of milk. "Dinner time for our special guest," she announced, cheerfully. "Dr. Carter says we can try some solid foods today." James watched as Lily cautiously reached for a piece of toast, her movements suggesting she was unused to such offerings. She took a small bite, her eyes widening slightly at the taste. "That's it," Eleanor encouraged. "Nice and slow." While Lily ate, Dr. Carter returned, gesturing for James to join her in the hallway. Her expression was serious. "Mrs. Ellis is suffering from severe schizophrenia, likely untreated for years," she explained quietly. "She's experiencing significant delusions and dissociative episodes. We've admitted her to our psychiatric unit for now." "Did she say anything more about Sarah or Lily?" James asked. Dr. Carter shook her head. "She's not coherent enough for a detailed conversation. But James, there's something else we need to discuss." She handed him a folder. Lily's blood work came back with some unusual markers. James opened the folder, staring at the medical terminology that meant little to him. "In English, please, Doc." "She has a rare genetic condition, Marshall-Wyatt syndrome. It's hereditary, often presenting with distinctive markers in the blood and mild developmental impacts. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but it requires monitoring and possibly medication as she grows." James frowned. "What does this have to do with finding out who she is?" Dr. Carter hesitated. "Marshall-Wyatt is exceedingly rare, James. Fewer than 1 in 50,000 people carry the genetic markers. But what's remarkable is—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I remember seeing these same markers once before, in another patient, years ago." James felt his heart quicken. "Who?" "Your daughter, Sarah." The words hit James like a physical blow. He staggered backward, steadying himself against the wall. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I was just starting my residency when Sarah was hospitalized after her car accident. I assisted with her blood work." Dr. Carter's eyes were compassionate but certain. "I remember because it was such a rare condition, James. The chances of 2 unrelated people in our small county having this syndrome are astronomically small." James's mind raced. Sarah, his only child. The daughter he hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years, not since that terrible fight when she was 18. The daughter whose postcards and letters he'd returned unopened, whose phone calls he'd rejected, whose life he'd removed himself from after Louise died. "It can't be," he said. But even as he spoke, pieces were falling into place. Catherine's mention of Sarah, the photo in the cabin, the familiar sense he'd felt looking at Lily. "There's only one way to be certain," Dr. Carter said gently. "A DNA test." James nodded numbly, his world tilting on its axis. Back in Lily's room, he sat beside her bed, seeing her through new eyes. The shape of her small chin, the way her eyebrows drew together as she concentrated on her food. These weren't just familiar features. They were Rowley features. They were Sarah's features. "Lily," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. The child looked up at him, studying his face with the same intensity he was studying hers. "My name is James. Did your mama ever mention that name?" For a long moment, Lily just watched him. Then, slowly, she nodded. James felt his heart constrict. Was your mama's name Sarah? Another nod, more certain this time. And Catherine, you call her Aunt Cat? Lily nodded again, then did something unexpected. She reached out, her small hand touching James's weathered cheek, where an unnoticed tear had begun to fall. Grandpa, she whispered, her voice so faint he almost missed it. Mama's picture. And suddenly James remembered the photo he'd found in the cabin drawer, the one he'd tucked into his pocket. With trembling hands, he pulled it out, wiping away the dust from the glass. In the clear hospital light, there was no mistaking the young woman's face. Sarah, his Sarah, holding a baby that could only be Lily. Which meant the impossible truth was now undeniable. The abandoned child he'd rescued was his own granddaughter. The photograph trembled in James's hands as he stared at his daughter's face. Sarah's smile was just as he remembered, slightly crooked with a dimple on the left side that matched his own. But her eyes held a maturity he'd never seen before, a depth that spoke of experiences he knew nothing about. This is your Mama? James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily nodded solemnly, reaching out to touch the glass. Mama's picture, she repeated. Eleanor, who had been quietly arranging Lily's medication, gasped softly as she glanced at the photo. James, is that? He nodded, unable to find words. The reality was crashing over him in waves. This child, this fragile, abandoned little girl he'd found by pure chance, was his flesh and blood, his granddaughter. I need to make some calls, he said, standing abruptly. Can you stay with her? In the hospital corridor, James leaned against the wall. Struggling to steady his breathing, he pulled out his phone and dialed Sheriff Brannigan. Tom, I need everything you can find on Sarah Rowley, he said when the sheriff answered. Last known address, employment, anything. And I need to know if there's a death certificate. The silence on the other end was heavy. You're Sarah? Yes. James swallowed hard. I think she might be Lily's mother. Jesus, James. Tom's voice softened. I'll get right on it. And I'll check Catherine Ellis's records, too. Next, James called his neighbor, Martha Jenkins, asking her to check on his house and feed his dog. He wouldn't be coming home tonight. Back in Lily's room, he found her drifting off to sleep, the photo clutched in her small hand. He gently tucked the blanket around her shoulders, his heart aching with a strange mixture of grief and wonder. I'll be right here, he whispered, settling into the chair beside her bed. As the night deepened, James's mind filled with memories of Sarah, her first wobbly steps across their living room floor, her contagious laugh, the way she'd curl up with a book far too advanced for her age, and then the darker memories, the teenage rebellion. That seemed more extreme than normal, the emotional outbursts, the diagnosis of mood disorder that neither he nor Louise had fully understood. After Louise died of cancer, everything had fallen apart. Sarah, then 17, had spiraled. Their arguments grew more intense until that final, terrible fight when she'd screamed that he'd never understood her, never tried to help her. He'd responded with harsh ultimatums, demanding she straighten up or leave. She had chosen to leave. His phone vibrated with a text from Tom. No death certificate for Sarah Rowley in Georgia or surrounding states. Last known address was Atlanta, 2011. Nothing since. Catherine Ellis has scattered records, multiple psychiatric holds in different counties. No fixed address. Working on more. James looked at Lily's sleeping face and felt a surge of determination. Sarah might still be alive, but if she was, where was she? Why would she leave her daughter? The Sarah he knew, despite her troubles, would never abandon her child, unless something had happened to her. The night nurse paused in the doorway, observing the scene, the elderly man watching over the sleeping child. Mr. Rowley, you should get some rest. We can bring in a cot. James shook his head. I've already missed too much time, he said quietly. Sometime after midnight, Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She seemed momentarily confused, then relaxed when she saw James. Grandpa, she whispered again, the words simultaneously breaking and healing his heart. Are you really him from Mama's picture? Yes, sweetheart, James answered, his voice rough with emotion. I'm really him. Lily's eyes, so like Sarah's, searched his face. Mama said you'd find us someday. She was right. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the hospital blinds. James awoke with a start, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. For a moment he was disoriented. Then his eyes found Lily, awake, watching him with those solemn brown eyes that now unmistakably reminded him of Sarah. Good morning, he said softly. To his surprise, Lily smiled, a small, hesitant curve of her lips that transformed her face. Morning, she whispered back. Dr. Carter arrived for morning rounds, her eyes widening when she saw the change in Lily's demeanor. Well, someone's looking much better today, she said, checking the monitors. How are you? Feeling, Lily? Instead of answering, Lily looked to James as if seeking permission or reassurance. It's okay, he encouraged. Dr. Carter is helping you get better. Lily nodded, then in a voice barely above a whisper said, Hungry? Dr. Carter smiled. That's a very good sign. We'll get you some breakfast right away. She turned to James. Can I speak with you outside for a moment? In the hallway, Dr. Carter's expression grew serious. James, the DNA results will take a few days, but given Lily's recognition of you and the syndrome markers, I think it's fairly certain she's your granddaughter. James nodded. She called me Grandpa, said Sarah told her about me. There's something else, Dr. Carter continued. Social Services has been notified. Standard procedure for a child without confirmed guardianship. A caseworker named Ms. Brennan will be here this afternoon. James felt a flash of protective instinct. Lily belongs with family, with me. I understand, but there's a process. Until we can legally establish your relationship and your fitness as a guardian, they'll need to follow protocol. Dr. Carter placed a hand on his arm. I'll support you however I can. When James returned to the room, Eleanor was helping Lily with a breakfast tray. The child was cautiously trying scrambled eggs, taking small, deliberate bites. She's doing wonderfully, Eleanor said. Appetite is returning, and she's more alert. James sat beside the bed. Lily, I need to ask you some questions about your mama and Aunt Kat. Is that okay? Lily set down her fork, her expression turning guarded, but she nodded. Where is your mama now? James asked gently. Lily's eyes dropped to her blanket, her fingers picking at a loose thread. Mama went to sleep, she said softly. In the winter, she was very cold. I covered her with blankets, but she didn't wake up. James felt his heart constrict. And after that, you stayed with Aunt Kat? Lily nodded. Aunt Kat tried to help, but sometimes she talked to people who weren't there. She looked up at James, her eyes suddenly older than her years. Then Aunt Kat went away too. She said she'd come back with medicine, but she didn't. How long were you alone, sweetheart? James asked, dreading the answer. Lily shrugged. Many days. The food was all gone. I looked for berries and things like Mama showed me. The pieces were falling into place. Sarah had died during the winter, probably from complications of her untreated condition. Catherine, already unstable, had tried to care for Lily but eventually wandered off during a psychotic episode. And somehow this small child had survived alone for weeks until James found her near collapse. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Brannigan stood there, his expression grave. James, can I speak with you? In the hallway, Tom handed James a file. We found records on Catherine Ellis, multiple psychiatric hospitalizations over the years. And this, he pointed to a police report. She was picked up for disoriented behavior about 2 months ago in Fairfield County, held for 72 hours, then released. 2 months? James echoed. That's how long Lily might have been alone. Tom nodded grimly. There's more. We went back to the cabin, did a thorough search. He hesitated. In the bedroom under several blankets, and we found remains. Female, been there since winter based on preliminary examination. James closed his eyes, grief washing over him. Sarah. We'll need DNA to confirm, but given everything else. Tom placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, James. Truly sorry. James leaned against the wall, the weight of 20 years of estrangement, of missed opportunities, crashing down upon him. She tried to reach me, Tom. All those years. The letters I returned unopened. The calls I ignored. You couldn't have known, Tom said. Quietly. I should have forgiven her, James whispered. If I had just answered one letter, one call, maybe she wouldn't have been alone in that cabin. Maybe she'd still be alive. From inside the room came a small voice that stopped both men in their tracks. Grandpa? Lily called. Are you? Coming back? James straightened, wiping his eyes. Sarah was gone, but her daughter, his granddaughter, was here. Alive. Needing him. I'm coming, sweetheart, he called back, his voice steadying with new purpose. I'm right here. Ms. Brennan from Child Protective Services arrived precisely at 2:00. A slim woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense expression and a heavy case file under her arm. James met her in the hospital conference room, where Dr. Carter had joined them to provide medical updates. Mr. Rowley, Ms. Brennan began after introductions, I understand you're claiming to be Lily's grandfather. Not claiming, James corrected firmly. I am her grandfather. We're awaiting DNA confirmation, but there's already substantial evidence. The genetic condition she shares with my daughter, her recognition of me, the photograph. Ms. Brennan nodded, making notes. And your daughter, Sarah Rowley, is presumed deceased? James swallowed hard. Yes. Sheriff Brannigan's department found evidence at the cabin. They're conducting proper identification now. I see. Ms. Brennan's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry for your loss. However, I need to be clear about the process moving forward. Lily will need temporary placement while we verify your relationship and assess your suitability as a guardian. Surely she can stay with me, James protested. I'm a former sheriff with a clean record. I have a stable home. It's not that simple, Ms. Brennan explained. There are home studies, background checks, financial assessments, and frankly, Mr. Rowley, your age will be a consideration. Raising a young child requires significant energy and resources. James felt a flash of indignation. I'm 68, not 98. I'm in excellent health, financially secure with my pension, and I own my home outright. Dr. Carter interjected. If I may, Ms. Brennan, Lily has formed a strong attachment to Mr. Rowley in a remarkably short time. After what she's been through, separating them could cause additional trauma. Ms. Brennan considered this. I'll need to speak with Lily myself, and then we can discuss options. In Lily's room, the child was sitting up in bed, coloring in a book Eleanor had brought her. She looked up warily as Ms. Brennan entered with James. Hello, Lily, Ms. Brennan said, smiling warmly. My name is Ms. Brennan. I'm here to help make sure you're safe and taken care of. Lily glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. Hello, she replied quietly. Over the next 20 minutes, Ms. Brennan gently questioned Lily about her life with Sarah and Catherine, her time alone, and her feelings about James. Throughout, Lily remained poised but reserved, answering in short, careful sentences. Then Ms. Brennan asked, Lily, would you like to stay with Mr. Rowley, with your grandfather, when you leave the hospital? Without hesitation, Lily nodded. He's my grandpa, she said simply, as if that explained everything. And how do you know he's your grandpa? Ms. Brennan pressed gently. Lily looked directly at James, her eyes clear and certain. Mama showed me his picture. She said he was a good man who helped people. She said he was sad because Grandma went to heaven, and that made him forget how to be happy for a while. She paused, then added, Mama said someday he'd remember, and then maybe we could go home. James fought back tears, stunned by Sarah's description of him. Not angry, not unforgiving, but sad, lost in grief. She had understood what he hadn't. Ms. Brennan seemed moved as well. Thank you, Lily. You've been very helpful. In the hallway, Ms. Brennan's professional demeanor returned, but with a softer edge. I'll be straight with you, Mr. Rowley. Given the circumstances, immediate foster placement might not be in Lily's best interest. I could recommend temporary kinship placement with you, pending the final verification and home study. Hope surged through James. You mean she could come home with me? Potentially, with supervision and regular check-ins, Ms. Brennan clarified. But there's a hearing process and the judge will have the final say. As Ms. Brennan departed with promises to expedite the process, Dr. Carter approached James with a folder in hand. The preliminary DNA results just came in, she said, her expression confirming what he already knew in his heart. It's a match, James. Lily is definitely your granddaughter. James nodded, a complex mixture of grief and joy washing over him. Sarah was truly gone, the daughter he'd lost twice, first to estrangement and now to death. But she had left behind this remarkable child, this second chance. That evening, as James sat beside Lily's bed reading her a story, she suddenly placed her small hand over his. "Grandpa," she said softly, "Mama wasn't mad at you." James paused, looking into those wise brown eyes. "She wasn't." Lily shook her head. "She said you did the best you could. She said everybody gets lost sometimes." In that moment, James felt something inside him finally begin to heal. A wound he'd carried for 20 years, now soothed by the forgiveness his daughter had somehow found, and that her child now offered him. "Your mama," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was a very wise person." "I know," Lily replied simply. "That's why she knew you'd find me." The small box from the cabin sat on James's kitchen table, its contents carefully preserved by the sheriff's department after their investigation. Tom Brannigan had personally delivered it this morning, his eyes conveying sympathy without needing words. "Everything's cleared for you to take," Tom had said. "Thought you might want some privacy going through it." Now alone, James stared at the box, gathering courage. Inside were the final possessions of his daughter's life, the life he'd missed, the years he couldn't reclaim. Dr. Carter had discharged Lily that morning, and she was now exploring the backyard with Martha Jenkins, who had volunteered to help during the transition. Through the window, James could see Lily cautiously petting his old golden retriever, Max, her face brightening as the dog gently licked her hand. With a deep breath, James opened the box. On top lay a small leather journal, worn at the edges. Beneath it were a few photographs, a silver locket, and several folded papers. But most prominent was an envelope with Dad written on the front in Sarah's handwriting. His hands trembling, James opened the unsealed envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Dad," it began. "If you're reading this, something has probably happened to me. I hope Lily found her way to you somehow." James's vision blurred with tears as he read his daughter's final words. Her struggle with the same condition that had confused and frightened him when she was a teenager. Her friendship with Catherine, who understood her bad days. Her joy when Lily was born, and her hopes that someday they might reconcile. "I never blamed you, Dad," she had written. "Mom's death broke something in both of us, and neither of us knew how to fix it. But Lily deserves the family I couldn't give. Her stability, safety, love. She deserves her grandfather. I hope someday you can tell her about me, not just my illness, but the good parts too. Tell her I loved watching thunderstorms, that I could name every constellation, that I laughed at terrible jokes. Tell her I loved her more than anything. In this world." The letter ended mid-sentence, as if Sarah had intended to write more but never found the time. Through the window, James heard Lily's laughter, a sound so pure it seemed impossible after all she'd endured. In that moment, he made a silent promise to Sarah. Her daughter would know. Everything about her mother, her courage, her kindness, her strength. This time he wouldn't fail. The Pine Hollow County Courthouse hadn't changed in decades. The same oak benches, the same portrait of a stern-faced judge from the 1800s, the same slightly musty smell of old paper and polish. James straightened his tie, unused to formal attire after years of retirement. Beside him sat Ms. Brennan, reviewing documents one last time before the hearing. "Remember," she said quietly. Judge Porter is fair but traditional. He'll have concerns about a single man your age taking on a young child. James nodded. I understand. 3 weeks had passed since Lily's release from the hospital. Those weeks had been filled with home visits, background checks, and preparations for this day, the custody hearing that would determine whether Lily could stay with him permanently. The temporary arrangement had gone better than anyone expected. Lily had adapted to James's home with remarkable resilience, slowly emerging from her shell. She still had nightmares, still fell silent sometimes, staring into the distance. But there were also moments of joy, helping James feed the chickens in the backyard, learning to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, curling up with Max during afternoon thunderstorms. All rise, called the bailiff as Judge Porter entered the courtroom. As the proceedings began, James listened to the county attorney outline Lily's case, her discovery, the identification of her mother, the confirmation of James as her grandfather. Then came expert testimonies, Dr. Carter speaking about Lily's medical needs, a child psychologist discussing her emotional well-being, Ms. Brennan detailing her home visits. Finally, Judge Porter addressed James directly. Mr. Rowley, you're seeking full legal guardianship of your granddaughter at an age when most men are enjoying retirement, not beginning to raise a child. What makes you believe you're the best option for Lily? James stood, feeling the weight of the moment. Your Honor, I failed my daughter. I let grief and misunderstanding separate us when she needed me most. His voice grew steadier as he continued. I can't change that past, but I can be there for her child, my granddaughter. I have the resources, the stability, and most importantly, the love to give her the home she deserves. And what about, Lily's special needs? Her medical condition, her emotional recovery? I've already arranged regular appointments with Dr. Carter for her Marshall-Wyatt syndrome. She's seeing the child psychologist weekly. I've child-proofed my home, researched schools with good support services, and joined a grandparents as guardians support group. James paused. Your Honor, I may be older than most guardians, but that's given me perspective and patience I didn't have when raising my own child. Judge Porter studied him thoughtfully. And where is Lily now? In the waiting room with my neighbor, Martha Jenkins, who's been helping us transition. I'd like to speak with Lily, the judge decided. In my chambers, if that's acceptable. 20 minutes later, Lily emerged from the judge's chambers, immediately seeking out James with her eyes. She gave him a small, brave smile that squeezed his heart. Judge Porter returned to the bench, his expression softened. Having reviewed all evidence and spoken with Lily herself, I'm prepared to rule on this matter. James held his breath as the judge continued. Mr. Rowley, raising a child at any age is challenging. Raising one who has experienced significant trauma even more so. The judge looked directly at James. However, it's clear to this court that the bond between you and your granddaughter is genuine and meaningful. Lily's wishes, combined with the positive reports from all involved professionals, lead me to believe that placement with you is indeed in her best interest. James felt tears of relief threatening as Judge Porter continued. I hereby grant James Rowley full legal guardianship of Lily Rowley, subject to quarterly check-ins with family services for the first year. As the gavel fell, James turned to find Lily standing in the aisle, her eyes shining with a hope he'd never seen before. He knelt down, opening his arms. Looks like you're stuck with me, kiddo, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Lily stepped into his embrace without hesitation. Good, she whispered. That's what Mama wanted. The, autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet as James and Lily walked the forest path. 2 months had passed since the custody hearing, and life had settled into a new normal. School for Lily, a part-time consulting position at the sheriff's office for James, and weekends spent slowly rebuilding a life together. Today's walk had a purpose. James carried a small backpack containing the box of Sarah's belongings, and his heart felt heavy with what he needed to do. Are we going to the cabin? Lily asked, her hand firmly in his. Near it, James replied. There's something I need to show you. And something we need to talk about. They had avoided this area since Lily had come to live with him. The cabin held too many painful memories, and James had been waiting for the right time. Dr. Matthews, Lily's psychologist, had finally agreed that Lily was ready for closure, but only if she wanted it. We don't have to go if you don't want to, James assured her. Lily squeezed his hand. I want to. Mama would say it's important to face the scary things. Her wisdom, so beyond her years, never failed to humble him. They stopped at a clearing about 100 yards from the cabin. Close. Enough to see its roof through the trees, far enough to maintain emotional distance. James spread a blanket on a dry patch of ground, and they sat together. I've been trying to understand what happened last winter, James began carefully. When she went to sleep. Lily nodded, her face solemn but composed. It was very cold. Mama was sick for a long time before. She couldn't get warm even with all the blankets. James opened the backpack, removing Sarah's journal. I found your mama's writings. She had the same condition you have, Marshall-Wyatt syndrome. But she didn't have medicine for it like you do now. The medicine that helps my brain stay calm, Lily said, showing her understanding of her treatment. That's right. Without it, the condition made it hard for her sometimes. James chose his words carefully. The last entry in her journal was from January. She knew she was very sick. Lily picked at the edge of the blanket. After Mama went to sleep, I stayed with her a long time. I thought she might wake up. But then Aunt Kat said we had to say goodbye to Mama. Her voice wavered slightly. We put flowers around her and said special words. Aunt Kat said Mama was with the stars now. James fought back tears, imagining Catherine, despite her own mental confusion, finding the clarity to give Sarah a dignified farewell with Lily's help. It was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Then Aunt Kat started getting more confused, Lily continued. She would talk to people who weren't there. She'd forget to eat. Sometimes she thought Mama was still with us. And then she left? James prompted gently. Lily nodded. She said she needed to find special medicine in town. She promised to come back. Her eyes met James's. But she didn't. Sheriff Brannigan had filled in this part of the story. Catherine had been found wandering in a neighboring county, completely disconnected from reality, unable even to remember Lily or the cabin. She was now receiving proper treatment in a state facility. You were very brave to survive on your own, James said, his admiration genuine. I did what Mama taught me, Lily said simply, about finding berries and nuts, about which plants were safe, but they were getting harder to find. She looked down. I was scared, and then I got too tired to walk far. James understood now why she had ended up by the anthill. Likely her strength had given out during a foraging attempt. Lily, he said softly, I want you to know something important. Your Mama wrote a letter for me. He pulled out Sarah's unfinished letter. She wanted us to find each other. She forgave me for not being there when she needed me, and she loved you more than anything in the world. Lily touched the letter gently. Can you read it to me? As James read Sarah's words aloud, he watched his granddaughter's face. The grief, the understanding, and finally, a kind of peace settling in her eyes. When he finished, Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, Do you think Mama can see us now, from the stars? I do, James answered honestly, and I think she'd be very proud of you. From his backpack, James removed one final item, a small wooden box he'd crafted in his workshop. I thought we could put some of your Mama's special things in here to keep at home, and maybe we could leave some flowers for her near the cabin. Would you like that? Lily nodded, her eyes bright with tears but her face resolved. Yes, and can we make a special garden for her at our house too, with all her favorite flowers? That, James said, his heart full, is a wonderful idea. Hand in hand they walked toward the cabin one last time, not to dwell in sorrow, but to honor Sarah's memory and finally say goodbye. Spring arrived in Pine Hollow County with a burst of color, daffodils lining the walkway to James's house, cherry blossoms dotting the backyard, and in the special corner near the old oak tree, Sarah's memorial garden blooming with her favorite wildflowers. 6 months had passed since Lily had come to live with James. The transformation in both their lives was remarkable. His once quiet house now echoed with the sounds of children's television shows, piano practice. Lily had revealed a natural talent that James encouraged, and the occasional giggle fits when they made pancakes together on Sunday mornings. Today was special, Lily's first day of school. Not just the homeschooling program she'd been following during her recovery, but real public school with other children. Dr. Matthews had finally given her approval, believing Lily was ready for this important step. "Are you sure my backpack has everything?" Lily asked for the 3rd time, nervously adjusting her new dress, purple with yellow. Butterflies, picked out specially for this occasion. James checked the list again. "Pencils, notebooks, lunchbox, your special medication, and—" He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Mr. Whiskers." He referred to the small stuffed cat tucked discreetly in the side pocket, Lily's comfort object. That had once belonged to Sarah. Lily nodded, taking a deep breath. "What if the other kids think I'm strange?" James knelt to her level, straightening the ribbon in her hair. "You, Lily Rowley, are not strange. You're extraordinary. You're brave and smart and kind." He tapped her nose gently. "And remember our deal. If it gets overwhelming, you can always call me and I'll be there in 5 minutes flat." The arrangement with Pine Hollow Elementary had been carefully coordinated. Lily's teacher, Ms. Wilson, knew her background and was experienced with trauma-informed education. The school counselor had a check-in scheduled for midday, and James would be volunteering in the library all morning just in case. "What if I forget how to make friends?" Lily whispered, her real fear emerging. After years of isolation with only Sarah and Catherine, social skills remained her biggest challenge. "Just be yourself," James advised. "And remember what we practiced. Ask questions about them, listen to their answers, and share something about yourself. One friend is all you need to start." The school building came into view as they drove down Main Street, its brick facade decorated with welcome banners for the new spring term. James could feel Lily tensing beside him. "Did my mama go to this school?" she asked suddenly. "She did," James confirmed. "And you know what? She was nervous on her first day too." "Really?" Lily's eyes widened. "Really? She hid behind my legs and wouldn't let go until her teacher brought out a book about stars. Then she forgot all about being scared." Lily smiled at this glimpse of her mother as a child. These stories had become precious to her, each one a thread connecting her to Sarah. As they pulled into the parking lot, Ms. Wilson was waiting by the entrance. Her warm smile immediately put Lily at ease. "You must be Lily," she said. "I'm so excited to have you in my class. We're starting a science unit on butterflies today, and I hear you're quite the nature expert." Lily glanced up at James, who winked encouragingly. He had mentioned her knowledge of plants and wildlife, learned during her time in the woods with Sarah. "I know a little," Lily admitted shyly. "Perfect. Maybe you can help us identify some species," Ms. Wilson suggested. She gestured toward the door. "Shall we go meet your classmates? They're very excited to meet you." Lily took a deep breath, then surprised James by standing a little straighter, her chin lifting with determination. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. James watched as his granddaughter walked toward her new beginning, her small hand in Ms. Wilson's. At the door, she turned back. "Grandpa?" "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for finding me." As Lily disappeared into the school building, James felt a presence beside him, as if Sarah herself were standing there, watching her daughter take this brave step forward. Maybe she was. "I won't let you down," he whispered. "Either of you." The 1-year anniversary of finding Lily arrived with the first frost of autumn. It also brought something James had been both anticipating and dreading: the final custody hearing to convert his temporary guardianship into permanent adoption. Despite all their progress, despite Lily's remarkable adjustment to her new life, a shadow of uncertainty still hung over their future. The law required one final review, one last chance for the system to evaluate whether James, now 69, was truly the best long-term solution for a 7-year-old child. The courthouse felt less intimidating this time as they walked up the steps hand in hand. Lily wore a blue dress with a cardigan James had knitted himself, a new skill he'd learned from Martha's patient teaching, and her hair was neatly braided, her own handiwork, which she'd proudly mastered last month. "Remember," James said softly as they approached the courtroom, "no matter what happens today, we're family. Nothing changes that." Lily squeezed his hand. "I know, Grandpa, but we're going to win." Her confidence bolstered his own as they entered to find a small gathering of supporters. Dr. Carter, Ms. Brennan, Sheriff Brannigan, Eleanor the nurse, and Ms. Wilson from school. Even Catherine Ellis was present, now stabilized on proper medication and residing in a supervised living facility. Though still fragile, she had become a regular visitor in their lives, a living connection to Sarah that both James and Lily treasured. Judge Porter smiled at Lily as proceedings began. "Well, young lady, you certainly look different from the last time I saw you." "I'm better now," Lily replied with simple dignity. "My grandpa takes good care of me." What followed was a series of testimonials that brought tears to James's eyes. Ms. Wilson describing Lily's academic progress, Dr. Matthews noting her emotional resilience, Catherine sharing how James had generously included her in Lily's life despite the painful past. When it was James's turn to speak, he kept it brief. "Your Honor, a year ago, I was a lonely old man going through the motions of living. Lily didn't just need me, I needed her. We've healed each other." Judge Porter nodded thoughtfully, then addressed Lily directly. "Lily, the law requires me to ask you as well. Is this what you want? To have your grandfather adopt you? Permanently?" Lily stood, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, sir. My mama told me in her letter that she wanted Grandpa to take care of me. She was right." She paused, then added with surprising insight, "We were both lost, but now we're found." The courtroom fell silent, moved by the wisdom in her young voice. Judge Porter cleared his throat. "Well, I see no reason to prolong this matter. It is the ruling of this court that the adoption petition is granted. Lily Sarah Rowley is hereby legally and permanently the daughter of James Rowley." As applause broke out around them, James knelt and embraced his granddaughter, now, in every legal sense, his daughter. But in his heart he knew Sarah would always be her mother, and he merely the fortunate guardian of her most precious gift. "We did it, Grandpa," Lily whispered in his ear. "No, sweetheart," he corrected gently. "You did it. You saved us both." 5 years had passed since that fateful day when James found a small, abandoned child near an anthill. Today, the Pine Hollow Town Square was filled with community members gathered for the unveiling of Sarah's sanctuary, a new mental health and family support center that would serve the rural county's most vulnerable residents. 12-year-old Lily stood beside James at the podium, her once frail frame now strong and healthy, her eyes bright with intelligence and purpose. Together they had channeled their experience into creating something meaningful, a place where families like theirs could find help before tragedy struck. "My mother, Sarah Rowley, fell through the cracks of a system that wasn't designed to reach people living on society's edges," Lily said, her clear voice carrying across the crowd. "This center is her legacy, a promise that no one in our community will be forgotten again." James watched his granddaughter with overwhelming pride. From the traumatized child who couldn't speak, she had blossomed into a compassionate young advocate who channeled her past into purpose. Her story had touched many hearts, inspiring changes in how the county approached mental health and child welfare. After the ceremony, they walked together to Sarah's garden behind their home, now a lush haven of wildflowers and butterflies. Here, on peaceful evenings, they still talked about Sarah, no longer with pain, but with love and gratitude for the thread that connected their lives. "Do you think she'd be proud?" Lily asked, placing fresh flowers beside the small memorial stone. "Beyond measure," James assured her, his arm around her shoulders. "You've carried her spirit forward in the most beautiful way possible." As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, James reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What began as a tragedy, a child forgotten, a family fractured, had transformed into a story of healing, not just for them, but for an entire community. "You know what Mama would say," Lily smiled, echoing words from Sarah's journal that had become their family motto. "Even the smallest light shines brightest in the darkest places." "And you, Lily Rowley," James said softly, "are the brightest light of all."